Good afternoon, and welcome to the Jewish community of Sedona and the Verde Valley and our adult Jewish education program. My name is Sheldon Hersh, and I will present today's program on the Megillah Esther and its hidden message. This program was created under a Creative Commons license. It is a non-commercial presentation solely for educational purposes. I want to acknowledge Rabbi David Shabtai and his book, Hiding in Plain Sight. Rabbi Shabtai's insightful commentaries contributed significantly to this project. The Megillah, or Book of Esther, is among the best-known books of the Hebrew Bible. Let's start with a short video overview of Purim.
Our story takes place in a land called Persia, which is roughly where we would find Iran today. But this story happened a long time ago, when kings ruled the land and before countries were formed. Shushan was the capital of Persia, which was ruled by King Ahasuerus, a lazy king who preferred to have parties for days rather than actually think about laws and ruling his kingdom. He let others do the thinking for him. One of his chief thinkers was Haman, but more about him later. During one of his never-ending parties, the king called for his wife, Queen Vashti. He wanted her to dance and show off her beauty for all of the king's friends. But Queen Vashti refused. She felt her body was private and not for showing to strangers. Her refusal embarrassed and angered the king so much that he took her crown and threw her out of the kingdom. The king, now alone and lonely, held a contest among all the young women in the kingdom to find a new wife. A beautiful Jewish woman named Esther entered the contest, because her uncle Mordecai encouraged her, saying, "After all, to have a Jew in such proximity to power could only be a good thing." When the king saw Esther, he was mesmerized by her beauty and chose her to be his queen. But he didn't know that she was Jewish, and Esther didn't tell him, at least not yet. Once Esther moved into the palace, Mordecai liked to stay nearby, sitting outside the palace gate. One day, while sitting there, he overheard two of the palace guards plotting to kill the king. Right away, Mordecai reported the news, and the two guards were caught and punished. Mordecai was a hero. This was written down in the king's official record book. Now, back to Haman. Because the king was not really interested in doing his job, he promoted Haman to do the work for him. So Haman became the most powerful advisor, more powerful than anyone else in the land. Haman was pretty full of himself and liked to walk around the kingdom and make everyone bow to him. Everyone did so, except for Mordecai, the Jew. "I will never bow down to a human person." This incensed Haman so much that he vowed not only to destroy Mordecai, but all of the Jewish people too. Haman hatched a plan. There will be a great massacre, a genocide of all the Jews. But on what day would this happen? Haman then drew lots, Purim, to choose the day, the 13th of the month of Adar. Haman went to the king and told him, "There is an evil people in this land who will not bow to you. Decree that the Jews should be killed." And the king, who didn't like to think for himself anyway, agreed. When Mordecai heard the decree, he immediately called for Esther, begging her to speak to the king on behalf of her people. But Esther was afraid. "I could be killed if I speak to the king without an invitation." But her uncle implored her, "Esther, if you are silent and say nothing to the king, it's as if you're agreeing with the decree. A person who stands silently by is responsible for the tragedy. You can use your privilege and your position to save your people and yourself. Maybe this is the reason why you became queen." The king had a restless night. He couldn't sleep. He called his servant to read to him from the chronicles of his kingdom, and heard the story of how Mordecai saved his life by reporting the plan of those guards, but saw that Mordecai had not yet been rewarded. The king summoned Haman and asked him, "How is a hero in the kingdom to be rewarded?" Haman, thinking this hero was himself, answered, "He should be paraded around the kingdom in the finest robes and on the finest horse." The king liked this advice and ordered Haman to parade Mordecai the Jew around the kingdom. In the meantime, Esther decided that the best way to tell the king that she is Jewish and that Haman was planning to kill her along with all of her people was to throw a lavish party, because everyone knew how much the king loved parties, and to invite not just the king, but also Haman. Once at the party, Esther gathered all her courage to tell the king everything. She declared, "There is a person in your palace who wants to destroy me and all of my people." The king demanded to know who would do such a thing. "Him, Haman," Esther declared. The king was furious. He granted Esther's request. Instead of the Jews being killed, Haman would be hanged on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The Jewish people were saved. From then on, the holiday of Purim was established and is celebrated on the 14th day of the month of Adar, to remember when the Jews acted with courage and spoke up for justice. We celebrate by sending food and treats to friends, mishloach manot, and giving gifts to the poor, matanot la'evyonim. We eat three-cornered cookies, hamantaschen, that look like Haman's pointed hat. We celebrate with costume parties and we wear masks, because you never know where you might find the face of God hiding in plain sight.
Let's see where the Megillah Esther fits into the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is called the Tanakh. Tanakh is an acronym. It's a word formed by the first letters of the three sections of the Hebrew Bible. The first section is the T for Torah, which means instruction or teaching, and which has the 5 books of Moses. The next section is the N for Nevi'im, the book of prophets, which has 8 books. The third section is the K for Ketuvim, the writings, which has 11 books. The Megillah Esther is a book within the writings. Purim and the book of Esther has the most historical evidence of any book in the Hebrew Bible. Purim is mentioned in the Talmud, in Midrashim, in Aramaic stories of Purim in the Targum, by historians Josephus and Herodotus, in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible called the Septuagint, and in archaeologic sources. The book of Esther and the book of Songs are the only books in the Hebrew Bible that do not mention God explicitly. But the book of Esther does have God's fingerprints all over it. The story of Purim is an example of how God's hidden hand can work through nature, through seemingly coincidental events, and through the actions of individuals. We begin by exploring the background to the story. This is the extent of the Persian Empire, about the time of the Purim story. The Persian Empire was the largest, most advanced superpower in the ancient world. It spanned 3 continents, extending from India in the east to Egypt in the west. Here is the land of Israel. Here is Shushan, the capital of the ancient Persian Empire, which today is located in southwest Iran. This is where the Purim story takes place. We can see Assyria, who conquered the northern kingdom of Israel centuries earlier, and we can see Babylonia, who conquered Judah, destroyed the temple, and exiled many Jews. If Haman's evil decree to kill all Jews in the Persian Empire was allowed to happen, most Jews in the world would have been wiped out, a worldwide pogrom. Persia had 2 systems of writing. Old Persian was written in cuneiform script, where wedges were pushed into wet clay to form words. This was used for royal decrees. Later, Persia used Aramaic, which was the lingua franca throughout the ancient Near East, including Jews in the land of Israel. Using one language across the vast empire helped solidify the Persian Empire. Aramaic and Hebrew use the same alphabet, but the spelling, grammar, and words are different, sort of how French is different from English. They use the same alphabet, but they form a different language. Mordecai may have used Aramaic to notify Jews throughout the empire of Haman's plot. This is an archaeologic reconstruction of the royal palace in Shushan, Persia, where the Purim story unfolded. Inside the palace, archaeologists have identified the royal banquet hall where Ahasuerus' feast took place and where he drunkenly requested Queen Vashti's presence. The stone columns we see here are 65 feet tall. The area is now a World Heritage Site. Persia was culturally advanced. Here are two beautifully executed stone reliefs from the king's palace. Let's see where the Purim story fits into Jewish history. When we talk about ancient Jewish history, we orient ourselves using the mileposts of the first and second temple periods. About 1300 BCE, before the Common Era, Moses received the Torah on Mount Sinai. About 350 years later, King Solomon built the first temple in Jerusalem. This first temple period lasted about 400 years, until 586 BCE, when Babylonia conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and exiled the Jews to Babylonia. About 50 years later, Persia, under King Cyrus, defeated Babylonia and allowed Jews to return to Judea and end their exile. The second temple was completed about 20 years later, while Darius was Persian king. Darius was the same king who was defeated by the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE. The Purim story takes place about 475 BCE, when King Ahasuerus, who has been identified as King Xerxes, ruled Persia. Xerxes was the same king who was defeated by the Greeks in the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE. At the time of the Purim story, most Jews living in the world had been born after the Jerusalem temple had been destroyed. Esther was a young unknown woman, a child of Jewish refugees who were exiled from their home in Jerusalem by the Babylonian conquest. The second temple period lasted about 600 years, until 70 CE, the Common Era, when Rome conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the second temple. Let's contrast the Torah with the Megillah. The Torah has two rollers to wind up the Torah, which are usually made of wood. The Megillah has only one roller. Because Hebrew reads from right to left, the roller is on the left-hand side. The roller can be wood or metal, and some Megillot have no roller at all. The Megillah can be ornamented, like the two Megillot on the right side, unlike the Torah, which has no ornamentation. The Megillah Esther text, like Torah text, has no vowels, no punctuation, and no trup symbols for chanting. And the Megillah chant is different than Torah chant. Like reading Torah, reading the Megillah takes time and patience. This is a Megillah, handwritten in Spanish from the 17th century Amsterdam. Many survivors of the Spanish Inquisition could no longer read Hebrew. So for the first time in Jewish history, we see a community translating Hebrew texts into Latin script. Note, the wooden roller is now on the right-hand side of the Megillah because Spanish, unlike Hebrew, is written from right to left. On the right-hand side is the Megillah, chapter 9, describing the destruction of Haman's 10 sons in Spanish. A Megillah can be written in any language people understand, just like our Passover Haggadah written in English. Here is a Megillah written in Arabic, because there were Jews living throughout the Arab world. There are two types of Jewish holidays. Torah holidays are holidays described in the Torah: Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shavuos. Rabbinic holidays were created after the Torah period in Jewish history. They were added by the rabbis because something happened in our history that made a drastic change in what it meant to be a Jew. Purim is a rabbinic holiday, as is Hanukkah. Purim and its fascinating characters and events has been the subject of many paintings throughout the ages, such as these. So let's look at how Purim has been portrayed. This is a 17th century painting of the feast of Ahasuerus, when a drunken Ahasuerus asks his servants to summon Vashti. Note the gold drinking cup in the king's hand. Here is a gold drinking cup from the same time period, uncovered at an archaeology site in Iran, along with a golden bowl that could have been used at Ahasuerus' feast. And here are some golden ornaments the king's guests could have worn to the feast. The Persian Empire lasted for 2 centuries until it was conquered by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. After Babylonia fell to the Persians, King Cyrus allowed the Jews to return to Israel, but only a remnant of the exiled Jews in Babylonia returned to Israel. After 2 generations in Babylonian exile, many Jews had become accustomed to Persian life and chose to remain in Persia rather than return to a devastated Israel. Esther, a young Jewish orphan who had been raised by her cousin Mordecai, was among the Jews who stayed in the land of Persia under the reign of King Ahasuerus. Throughout the centuries, artists have imagined who Queen Esther was and what she looked like. And in these pictures, we see some representations. And in paintings like these. There are many paintings of Purim characters and events. Here is a gorgeous 17th century painting featuring Esther and Mordecai writing the first Purim letter to the Jews. Here are scenes of Queen Esther and King Ahasuerus. Here is Queen Esther denouncing Haman to King Ahasuerus. These paintings show the triumph of Mordecai as Haman parades him around the city on a horse. The top left is a 17th century painting. The painting on the right is a 15th century painting. The photo at the bottom left is taken from the Dura Europa synagogue, built in the 3rd century CE, Common Era. In the photo, we can see Mordecai riding a horse led by Haman. This is the tomb of Queen Esther and her cousin Mordecai, located in present-day Hamadan, Iran. It is a Jewish pilgrimage site. On the right is the interior of the tomb of Esther and Mordecai. At first, Esther hid her Jewish identity, but when the survival of the Jewish people was at stake, she dropped her mask and revealed her true Jewish identity to her husband, King Ahasuerus. On Purim, a Holocaust was averted, but the very existence of Purim in our historical memory is traumatic, and the Jewish response to trauma is counterintuitive. We have made Purim Judaism's most dramatic, fun-filled holiday. We defeat fear by joy. We conquer terror by celebration. We prepare a festival meal, invite guests, give gifts. We wear masks. We drink a little too much. We make a Purim spiel. We surround ourselves with the most effective antidote to fear, joy in life itself. During the reading of the Megillah, we use a grogger in order to drown out the hated name of Haman. And don't forget to boo. As the 3-sentence summary of Jewish history puts it, they tried to destroy us, we survived, let's eat. The Megillah concludes with a letter from Mordecai to Jews around the world, charging them to establish the Purim holiday and to observe them as days of fasting and gladness, for sending delicacies to one another and for giving gifts to the poor. So on the day of Purim, we send items of food to ensure that everyone has sufficient food for the Purim feast, which is the grand finale of the day. And we are obliged to drink alcohol until one no longer knows the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordecai. On the right are traditional Hamantaschen, which are supposed to be Haman's 3-cornered hat or even Haman's ears. Now that we have looked at the story of Purim, let's look at the hidden message of Purim. Megillah Esther is about the revelation of the hidden, even though the word God does not appear in the book of Esther. The book is all about God. For 1,000 years of biblical history, God spoke to people, appeared in dreams, performed miracles, revealed himself at Sinai, and sent prophets to the people and kings of Israel. But after the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem, God's presence receded into a state of hiddenness. Since then, our challenge has been to find God's hidden hand in history, in current events, and in the seemingly random occurrences of our own daily lives. The book of Esther, which takes place after the destruction of the temple, is full of coincidences and reversals of fortune which hint at God's hidden control of events. Even the name of the book, Megillah Esther, the Scroll of Esther, reflects the hidden and the revealed. The name Esther is related to the Hebrew word hidden, while the word Megillah is related to the Hebrew word reveal. So, the words Megillah Esther can be translated as the revelation of the hidden. Purim teaches us that rather than look for God in miracles, we should look for God hidden all around us in our everyday lives. Although God is never overtly mentioned, the Megillah is laced through and through with God's handiwork. What we see as coincidence is really God at work, and there are lots of coincidences in the Esther story. We recognize God's presence through a series of seemingly random events, coincidences, or reversals that come together to form a grand design that can only come from God. The real hero in the Megillah is not Esther or Mordecai, but the invisible God who was working behind the scenes to preserve the Jewish people against all odds. Let's read them. Just as Vashti disappears, Esther appears. Esther, an unknown Jewish girl, becomes queen of Persia at just the right time. Instead of enemies killing Jews, Jews killed their enemies. Instead of enemies taking Jewish property, the king gave Haman's property to Esther. Instead of Mordecai parading Haman on horseback, Haman paraded Mordecai. Haman's lots came out 11 months later on the last possible day and gave Jews time to prepare. Mordecai just happens to overhear the guard's plan to kill the king. The king can't sleep and just happens to read his chronicles and learns that Mordecai saved him. Haman was hanged on the same gallows he had built for Mordecai. Instead of Mordecai being executed, he is promoted. Instead of the 14th of Adar being a day of mourning, it became a day of celebration. These verses are important to the story. When Esther is worried about approaching the king to tell him of the plot to kill the Jews, Mordecai implores Esther to do it to save her people. 4:13. Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. You will not be saved just because you are queen. 4:14. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. If you don't speak up, you will be killed. And even if you don't speak up, relief will come from somewhere. Mordecai has full belief that God will not abandon his people, and he is confident the Jews will be saved somehow. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Here, Mordecai is able to peek behind the curtain and sees that God is in control and that God had brought Esther to this place so she can intervene in the Jewish people's danger. 4:16. Esther's plea, then I shall go to the king, and if I perish, I perish. This becomes a defining moment of courage. Here, with the Jewish people's fate at stake, she drops her mask and goes to tell the king about Haman's plot and that she is a Jew. In Jewish tradition, the Purim story began centuries ago. The Amalekites were Israel's oldest enemy. They had attacked the Israelites as they came out of Egypt. And King Saul disobeyed God's command to kill Agag the Amalek. Now Haman was a descendant of Agag the Amalekite. And King Saul and Mordecai were both descendants of the Israelite Kish. So, the descendant of Agag, Haman, and the descendant of Kish, Mordecai, meet again in Shushan, and Mordecai destroyed Haman, a descendant of Agag, because King Saul spared Agag. The word Purim comes from the word pur, or lot. The holiday derives its name from Haman casting lots to determine when to destroy the Jewish people. Some people believe, as Haman did, that life is determined by luck or chance or fortune or by the force of a person's will. This is a pagan viewpoint. Judaism believes that life circumstances are not a product of luck or fortune. Jews believe God is in control of everything. Even events which appear random or haphazard are really directed by God. We have no room for pagan ideas of chance, fortune, accident, or luck. Everything happens because of a divine plan. In chapter 9, the Jewish community defended itself, killing 75,000 Persians across the empire. The rationale was that it was self-defense against a massive, pre-planned anti-Jewish pogrom. In a world in which invading armies destroyed cities, slaughtered and enslaved enemies, the Jews did the same. The conventions of war for Jews were the same for other cultures. Total defeat, total destruction. In any pogrom, as in the Holocaust, greed is always involved. In Esther 3:13, we see that Haman's decree to the provinces said to destroy all the Jews and to plunder their goods. In contrast, we see in Esther 9:16 that the Jews fought back but did not lay hands on the spoils. The Jewish response was not about money or greed. It was about survival. And so, we have looked at the story of the Megillah Esther, and we have looked behind the curtain to see the hidden message of Purim, that God is in control of the world. This ends our program. Thank you.